This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
I was trying to get it how I live. I want them dead presidents. I want to pull up, head spin, get it, get fly. I got 6 jobs, I don't get tired. I don't get tired.
And we are still not tired on this week's episode of Two Bad Hombres. I am your host, Vito Geronimo Churco, alongside nobody. As John Charles Macaron once again is not out of town, but out on assignment at the big Michigan State-Michigan rivalry game at the Big House this afternoon in Ann Arbor. As I like to call it, a squared for Ann Arbor. And John Macaron is a proud MSU alum who has seen his Sparty Nation, struggle this season, and to the degree of a 4-5 mark. And are they even going to get bowl eligible? Will this be Mark D'Antonio's final season on the sideline for the Spartans as well? Michigan, meanwhile, stands at 7-2 and number 14 in the AP poll. Now, they're on the outside looking in when it comes to the playoff picture. That is the college football playoff picture specifically. But definitely this year, U of M has the clear-cut advantage against MSU, basically in every single category as well. So Michigan, I believe, should easily get the victory at the Big House on Saturday afternoon. And if Harbaugh and U of M Nation fails to record a big margin victory, a victory in which Michigan wins by 10 or more points, then I think it's disappointing for Michigan. And maybe I wouldn't go as far as embarrassing for U of M, but for sure, if Michigan dropped this contest somehow, some way, Saturday afternoon, then it would be utterly embarrassing for Harbaugh and company. Once again, I don't see that happening, as Michigan State all season long has struggled mightily, offensively definitely, but even defensively for most of the season thus far. Michigan State has not lived up to the bill and has disappointed hugely. Now with Lewerke, a veteran passer under center, Brian Lewerke, remember, last week, got hit really hard, failed to undergo concussion protocol when many thought he should have. And after Lewerke's comments about what he went through after getting hit hard and failing to undergo that concussion protocol a week ago against Illinois, it sounded like Michigan State mishandled him and his issue hugely. And that's just another black mark on Michigan State's football season this year, and specifically on head coach Mark D'Antonio and company. And D'Antonio, I think at this point, guys, has to retire. And if he doesn't, will he get fired? I think it could be the end of his tenure, 10-plus years, as the head man in East Lansing. Remember, he's won a Rose Bowl, won a Big Ten championship. He's been to the college football playoff semifinal, got blown out against Alabama. But remember this much. Michigan under Harbaugh, and now your number 5, has failed to win a Big Ten championship, has not made a Rose Bowl, has not made a college football playoff semifinal. Mark D'Antonio, in his 10-plus years as the leader of the Michigan State football program, has done that at the very least. Maybe the past few seasons, Michigan State has not lived up to the bill and has failed to meet expectations, especially this year when you use the recency bias. But overall-wise, over his tenure, now with him being the winningest coach in Michigan State football history, you can't argue with the fact that D'Antonio, overall-wise, has left a positive legacy or positive mark on the Michigan State football program. Now, the last few years, once again, Michigan State football has started going in the opposite direction. Some have labeled it as John L. Smith-esque. Maybe I won't go that far, but it hasn't been good for Sparty Nation in recent memory, and I think a coaching change needs to be made and an overhaul of the entire coaching staff, and the direction of the program needs to be made. Because right now, under the leadership of D'Antonio, of Mark D, it looks like State is headed in the wrong direction, and it could be irreparable as time goes on more and more. So Michigan, Michigan State specifically, let me just say that, cleared up. Michigan State, if it wanted to make a wise move, it would either get rid of the entire coaching staff at the end of this campaign or allow, and I think best case scenario, allow D'Antonio to retire gracefully as the winningest head coach in program history. Now, once again, looking at this game from the Michigan perspective, Harbaugh and company, they need to win in convincing fashion. They need to win by more than one touchdown. They need to win by 10-plus points. If they don't, once again, I wouldn't say it's utterly embarrassing, but it's definitely largely disappointing and slightly embarrassing. And Michigan, at the very least, cannot afford to get upset in this one this afternoon at the Big House. Once again, I believe Michigan gets it done and gets it done in convincing fashion, winning by 2 touchdowns against Sparty today, allowing Michigan to improve to 8-2 on the season, MSU falling subsequently to 4-6. And realistically, at this point, I don't think State gets to a bowl. And really, who the hell cares? If you're part of Sparty Nation, a proud alum, a proud fan, a proud member of that program right now, I think you're thinking at the end of the day that what will that do for this program at this point? When you see the writing on the wall is that Michigan State right now is headed in the wrong direction as a football program. So what would getting to a bowl game mean for this program at this point? I believe diddly squat. Anyways, moving on from that topic to another big one that has become mainstream and talked about by every single media member, it seems like, locally and nationally. And it is the Myles Garrett incident from Thursday Night Football when his Cleveland Browns took on his AFC North, the Browns' AFC North rival, Pittsburgh Steelers in Cleveland. Cleveland got the victory, 21-7, yet the headlines weren't about that and how the Browns beat the Steelers for the first time since 2014. A huge victory for this franchise that wasn't very good last year, hasn't been very good up to this point in the 2019 campaign, yet got the victory, went to 4-6 subsequently on the season, and you would think the team is turning around its season, has a chance, outside chance at least, at making the playoffs now. Yet Myles Garrett with his egregious mistake now has caused the Browns to really have no shot at turning around their season and has caused the Browns yet again to be spoken about negatively. And what did he do specifically? Well, he made such an egregious misjudgment, a mistake that he will never live down. And what it was is that he stripped the helmet of Steelers quarterback Mason Rudolph, then used it as a weapon on Rudolph and swung at Rudolph, connected with Rudolph's head. And it was egregious. It was horrible to see. An ugly black mark on Garrett and the Browns organization that will leave a stain for many years to come. You could argue it's irreparable for the Browns and for sure for Garrett and his reputation as a player moving forward. And it's something that's inexcusable, uncalled for, should have never happened. Myles Garrett, though, let his emotions get the best of him in that moment. With only 8 seconds remaining in the game was out of reach for the Steelers. The Browns were up 21-7. I mean, my God, the game was over, guys. Yet Garrett made the mistake of letting his emotions get the best of him and letting it get to the extent where the emotions boiled over for him, and he went to strip the helmet of Rudolph, started swinging with Rudolph's helmet, and actually connected once again with Rudolph's head. Rudolph didn't get injured, but he could have been concussed or worse. Just remember that too. If it was the right part of that helmet, it could have speared Rudolph and his head and caused Rudolph to bleed out, could have caused huge, severe injury, could have caused, worst case scenario, death, as some have put it. So this was egregious. This was totally uncalled for. This has been labeled as criminal. Now, Rudolph has said now, since the incident on Thursday Night Football, that he will not come out and press charges against Garrett. But some said, yeah, criminal charges should have been pressed, at least could have been pressed against Garrett for his egregious error in judgment. Something that should have never happened from Garrett. Yet it did. Once again, Garrett allowed his emotions to get the best of him, and it resulted in one of the most egregious moments in the history of the NFL. It's something that some ex-NFL players came out and said in the postgame on Thursday night, such as Damian Woody, that he had never seen it in all of his years playing in the NFL. 12 years, I believe he said, he played in the NFL with the Patriots, with even our Detroit Lions, and all of those years in the league, and he never saw such an incident in which it was as gruesome as that and as inexcusable as that. And he labeled it, and Scott Van Pelt did as well in SportsCenter after the game, as criminal. And it was. It could have led to a severe injury for Mason Rudolph. At the very least, a concussion for Rudolph, because, once again, he connected with Rudolph's head. Worst case scenario could have led to the death of Mason Rudolph on the field or after the game. So Myles Garrett should have known better. He's a professional football player, and there's no excuse to be made for Myles Garrett. No matter what Mason Rudolph said to Garrett to provoke him, or the fact, and you have to bring up the fact that Rudolph did go for Garrett's helmet, and that provoked Garrett as well. Yet at the end of the day, Myles Garrett, as a professional athlete, should have known better. And remember what the repercussions are now for Garrett's team, the Cleveland Browns. They will now be without Garrett indefinitely for the remainder of this season, and maybe even for longer, as the NFL Commissioner's Office has come down harshly with the suspension for Garrett, suspending him for the remainder of this season. Once again, as they labeled it, indefinitely, meaning he could miss now the 2020 campaign and even longer than that as well. But at the very least, now without their top defensive performer in Myles Garrett, this elite pass rusher, well, guess what that means for the Browns more than likely? They're not going to continue turning around their season, as it looked when before that incident, it looked like the Cleveland Browns were about to turn around their campaign, getting their fourth victory with some easy games coming up. So now, almost you can completely erase that from happening. This will be an ugly stain on the Browns organization for years to come that will be hard to erase from the memory bank of so many folks that watched that game from afar. Were at the field in Cleveland as well to see that up close and personal. People, that are media pundits and fans alike, once again, will never forget that incident on Thursday Night Football. It's an ugly stain on the Cleveland Browns organization that won't be erased anytime soon. But now, in regards to that suspension handed down by the league office, I think it was a right decision made by Commissioner Roger Goodell and company. I think it's something he had to do at the very least, as when you look at suspensions handed down for egregious incidents in the past, and you can date all the way back to Albert Haynesworth, who was suspended for then an unprecedented 5 games, and it was for him stomping on Dallas Cowboys center Andre Gerard's head. And the league suspended Haynesworth for 5 games subsequently, more than twice the length of the previous longest suspension. This happened back in October of 2006. I was still a very young lad at that point. So, as the league labeled it at that point, when handing down that 5-game suspension to Albert Haynesworth, the former stout defensive lineman, it said it was flagrant, unnecessary roughness on the part of Haynesworth when once again he stomped on Cowboys center Andre Gerard's head. And Gerard needed 30 stitches to repair the cuts left by the tackle's cleats. It was ugly. It was egregious. It was inexcusable. Yet this mistake made on the part of Myles Garrett still should be viewed as even more egregious and inexcusable. As once again, it could very easily, and was in the postgame, and since, as criminal. And criminal charges could have been pressed. Could have easily been pressed by Mason Rudolph if he really felt the need to do so. Yet, he decided not to do so. And, if the charges were pressed, Myles Garrett would have been dealing with something much worse than just being suspended indefinitely by the NFL, with his career now in shambles and in doubt moving forward. It could have been him facing prison time. Think about that. Because of what Garrett did on the field on Thursday night, it was so bad, so uncalled for. Stripping the helmet of an opposing quarterback and then using it as a weapon against Mason Rudolph. It was so bad that, yes, Myles Garrett realistically could have faced prison time for his actions. And guess what? If Mason Rudolph would have filed criminal charges against Garrett, not a lot of people would have complained. And once again, you had a lot of veteran players and ex-NFL players that came out after that game and have come out since, with it now being Saturday, the Saturday after that Thursday night football contest between the Browns and Steelers, that have labeled that act as not only inexcusable, which it should be at the very least, but also as criminal, subsequently damaging the reputation of Myles Garrett as a person, as a player, but also as a man off the field for many years to come. Now, I will bring this up. It was very good to see from Garrett that he was very apologetic. Now, in the postgame, in the locker room, after the game on Thursday night, but also on Friday, he came out with this statement. And a direct quote now here, and open quotes. "Last night, I made a terrible mistake. I lost my cool, and what I did was selfish and unacceptable. I know that we are all responsible for our actions, and I can only prove my true character through my actions moving forward. I want to apologize to Mason Rudolph, my teammates, our entire organization, our fans, and to the NFL. I know I have to be accountable for what happened, learn from my mistake, and I fully intend to do so." Now, that was the only path Garrett had to take, and could have taken, I should say, after that incident. So I'm glad he did. I'm glad he was apologetic for his mistake, a mistake that he will live for, once again, for the rest of his NFL career, which is in doubt now, but also for the rest of his life, which is most important. Now, the Browns, I will bring this up really quick, once again, not to hit you guys over the head with it, but when you look at their schedule moving forward, they had a relatively easy schedule that, once again, now with Garrett, their best defensive player, out for the remainder of the season at the very least, you can almost erase all of the positive energy the Browns could have generated, once again, from that victory against their division rival Steelers on Thursday night. Now, their next game is against the Dolphins. After that, they would have played the Steelers again on Pittsburgh. That would have been a game you would think they would lose, but the Steelers aren't that great, especially offensively, because Rudolph was not good at all. And the Steelers' offense, remember, only generated 7 points in that contest on Thursday night. But then they would have faced the winless and division rival Bengals on December 8th, followed by a 3-win Cardinals team who has a tie as well from that Week 1 contest with the Lions. That is a contest to be played on December 15th. After that, a very tough contest against Lamar Jackson and company, and that's on the 22nd. And then you had the Bengals again for the Browns. So all of those games, you could say, most of them, are relatively easy matchups for the Browns. And that's why you could have thought and could have reasonably argued that the Browns, with their weak schedule moving forward, could have turned around their campaign, could have maybe, just maybe, reached the playoffs as well, and Baker Mayfield could have resurrected his reputation as a franchise passer for the Browns organization. As a lot of people at this point in Baker's second campaign in the NFL have started to doubt the fact that he can be that franchise passer that can lead the Browns to the promised land, and at the very least to the playoffs one day. I think once again you can erase that possibility completely for the Browns this season. Now, to my last topic, and a big one for a lot of us locally here in the Metro Detroit area and throughout the state of Michigan that still for some odd reason, care about the Detroit Lions. And getting into now their game with the Dallas Cowboys on Sunday, which is their Week 11 contest to be played at Ford Field. So they welcome the 5-4 Cowboys, who are tied for first place in the NFC East division. An article that I penned for our SI-affiliated Lions website that John Macron and I write for, and it was an article about Ezekiel Elliott, and a scouting report on Ezekiel Elliott, what he brings to the table, and what Zeke has done up to this point in this season. Also touched upon what he's done in his career up to this point as well, to a certain extent. And you look at what Zeke has done, and for the most part, it has been magnificent. He has been every ounce of the definition of a go-to back for the Cowboys organization in his 4th year in the league now. Remember, he is a back out of Ohio State where he was a standout, racked up tons of offensive accolades, and looking specifically at his stats, all-time against the Detroit Lions. In 2 career games against the Lions, the one-time All-Pro has rushed for 232 yards and 2 touchdowns, along with 100 receiving yards and a score. His most recent outing against the Lions was a huge one for himself, and it came in Week 4 of last season. In that game, Zeke rushed for $152. And also accumulated 88 reception yards and a TD. It resulted in a career-high 240 yards from scrimmage for him, and also marked one of Detroit's all-time worst defensive performances against an individual player. By the way, it was only the 4th game Patricia had coached as Detroit Lions head man. And in recording those 240 yards from scrimmage, he became the 4th player to produce 240 or more scrimmage yards in a contest against the Lions, and once again was far from an optimal start to Patricia's head coaching tenure. Before Elliott, it hadn't been done against the Lions since former Seattle Seahawks great and Pro Football Hall of Famer Steve Largent had accounted for 261 scrimmage yards in a game in the Motor City in 1987. All of Largent's yards came as a receiver, though. Meaning, I think Elliott getting it done as both the back and receiver in that contest in Week 4 last year was more impressive. Now, he comes into this Week 11 matchup with 6 scores on the ground, tied with his total from last year. But, disappointingly, also with a career-low rushing yards per game total of 87.6 and career-low receiving yards per game total of 21.3. Through 9 games, he also hasn't recorded a TD catch yet. Now, in each of his first 3 seasons in the league, he recorded at least 1 touchdown reception, including 3 a season ago. So Zeke hasn't been as great in his 4th season in the league, yet has still been very good as the bell cow back in the Cowboys' backfield. And he's coming off of a relatively weak, and not just relatively, but a subpar Week 10 performance against the Lions' NFC North divisional rival Minnesota Vikings, in which he rushed for just 47 yards and hauled in 2 balls for 16 yards. So all of this means to me that Zeke is in for a big performance against the Lions on Sunday. And remember, Patricia's D hasn't stopped anyone on the ground all season long, allowing 129.7 rushing yards per game, the 27th worst mark in the league. And the Cowboys' offense, spearheaded by Elliott and also 4th-year passer Dak Prescott, subsequently should be able to exploit the Lions' porous defense all game long. And the Cowboys' rushing attack coming into this game has averaged the 5th most yards on the ground this season at 138.2 per game. So, I mean, very easily, I think you can say that the former OSU standout will take advantage, and full advantage of the Lions' deficiencies on Sunday. As I predicted in that Lions article for Lions Maven, the SI-affiliated Lions website that John Macaron and I are now writing for. And my prediction was 21 carries for 108 yards and a touchdown to go along with 4 catches for 42 yards from Elliott in this Week 11 tilt. So, if that does occur, well, you can very easily argue that the Cowboys will win, but not only win on Sunday, but win convincingly in this matchup with the Detroit Lions at Ford Field Sunday afternoon. And guess what? As a lifelong Lions fan, and hard for me to say, but it is a fact, I think the Lions get beaten. And not only get beaten, but get beaten convincingly in this game on Sunday. And in a relatively interesting storyline, too, you have here Kellen Moore, the former Lions backup quarterback, calling plays for the Cowboys offense, which, once again, has been relatively strong all season long, both through the air and on the ground. That's why you also have to fear the passing attack led by Prescott. Prescott also could go off very easily, have a big day through the air, and obviously can rush for some yards as well, being a dual threat passer that the Lions will have a very hard time stopping. And I think that will be the case. I think they will have a very hard time stopping Ezekiel Elliott as well, and all that the Cowboys do on the ground. And subsequently, the Lions lose yet again and fall to 3-6-1 on the season, and a very disappointing campaign for Matt Patricia and company that I think will ultimately cause Patricia to be severely on the hot seat, yet not to lose his job because of who's running the organization, and that is the Ford family, which has been loyal to a fault with so many past employees, including Matt Millen when he was running the front office, and had such a long leash and way too long of a leash. Others, plenty of times in the past as well, have had too long of a leash. You can argue with the past headman for the Lions, and that was Jim Caldwell. You can argue that he had too long of a leash. And I think Patricia and Bob Quinn will both also be the beneficiaries of that long leash and get a third year. Patricia specifically, a third year. Quinn also will get another year on the job next season. And I think that will be a mistake for the Lions organization in 2020 and beyond. But should he be fired? I definitely have taken the stand now in past podcasts, and on this podcast we'll take the stand that Patricia should be fired. And if Patricia is fired as well, Quinn should go out with him too, because they're both tied. They're both attached at the hip to one another, as Quinn has built up this team to reflect the philosophy that Patricia's tried to preach and tried to instill, especially defensively, as Patricia was the defensive coordinator. Remember, before taking over this Lions head coaching gig, was a D coordinator for the New England Patriots. Instituted that bend but don't break philosophy on defense. Yet it has faltered numerous times over the course of the past 2 seasons. And this year, tremendously, it has faltered. The Lions, one of the worst defensive teams in all of football, towards the very bottom, and in both stopping the run and stopping the pass. And that falls upon the shoulders of Patricia, most notably because he is a head coach. He's the leader of this franchise. He was a so-called defensive guru. So if anybody is to be blamed, it should be him, and even more than Paul Pasqualoni, even though Pasqualoni supposedly, as the D coordinator, has been calling the plays throughout the course of this season. Once again, though, Patricia made the decision to hire his former mentor, a guy that he served under while Patricia was at Syracuse, and Pasqualoni was a head coach at Syracuse. So forget Pasqualoni and him being a scapegoat, because I know he will be the scapegoat more than likely ultimately at the end of this season. If anybody is to lose their job, it will be Pasqualoni instead of Patricia. But guess what? It should be Patricia that loses his job. And if you're going to do that, Quinn does as well, and clear out the whole entire coaching staff too. And with that being said, this has been, the latest edition of Two Bad Hombres. And you can always follow me on Twitter at Vito Jerome. Follow the Detroit Sports Podcast Network on Twitter at Detroit Podcast. And also remember to check us out online at DetroitSportsPodcast.com. It's been a pleasure speaking to all of you once again, and we'll do it again next Saturday. Guys, until then, have a great week, and I'll talk to you. Adios.
I was trying to get it how I live. I want them dead presidents. I want to pull up, head spin.